I'm Lisa Golightly, and I'm a painter.
Hello, I'm Chris Stafford, and you're listening to AART, the podcast where we get to know women from around the world of visual arts. This is Season 2, Episode 21. My guest this week is the figurative painter Lisa Golightly, whose work revolves around memory and how snapshots shape and influence change. Lisa was born in Eugene, Oregon in 1974, one of two children, she has an older brother, to parents Frank, an accountant, and Patty, a teacher. Her father was also an amateur painter and sculptor who guided Lisa's introduction to art. She was also a keen rider and enjoyed showing hunter-jumper. Lisa's early academic interest was photography, and she graduated from the University of Arizona with a Bachelor in Fine Arts, leaning towards a career in photography. It was after she married her husband John that she turned her attention back to art and progressed to becoming a professional artist. Lisa works exclusively in her studio and shows her work at several galleries, including Billis Williams in Los Angeles, California, George Billis Gallery in New York City and Connecticut, the Maya Friedman Gallery in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Julie Nestor Gallery in Park City, Utah, and the Patricia Rovza Gallery in Seattle, Washington. Lisa lives in Portland, Oregon, with her family and two dogs. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is riding, because you told me off air that you actually did ride horses as a child. Tell me about that.
Oh, I had to bother my parents for years before they let me ride. And then, and so I did it for a short period of time and then picked it up again for another shortish period of time as an adult. Got that kind of exercise, that desire. And so now I'm good. I always wanted my own horse. And then I grew up and I was like, oh, that's a lot more work than I thought it would be.
You don't have that urge to go galloping across fields any longer.
I don't. I know. I don't know where it went, but yeah.
No, we've had other guests, as you know, one of which is Eleanor Cardoza, who's our sculptor friend in Geneva. She rode when she was younger. There's a few guests that have ridden horses, but don't do it any longer. What about dogs and cats?
Oh, yeah. We have two big crazy dogs.
Oh, you do? So you're a dog person?
Yeah, we're dog people. Yeah.
And you also told me when we first spoke, Lisa, that you're into music.
Yeah, I love music. And it's actually, it's a through string through my life for sure. Like I met my husband at a concert. My kids love music, and we somehow managed to, it's one of our greatest achievements is our kids like the same music as we do.
Oh my, that is an achievement, because your son and daughter, they're both in their 20s, so you wouldn't expect them to have the same playlist.
No, yeah.
So what genres are there then?
Let's see. Well, like Radiohead, probably like 90s, alternative, I would say, is where we land. My husband probably has a more specific description. He's the more musician in the family, but and so my daughter actually has a better grasp of, like, say 70s 80s music than I do.
Okay Well, you mentioned your husband John then, and that you met at a concert, so you have to tell us which concert where you
This is embarrassing. A U2 concert, actually. We were at Fulton College and met through a roommate there.
And that was it?
Yeah, that was it.
That was it. It was music that brought you together. Do you play an instrument, Lisa, or was that part of it?
No. My husband plays guitar and has always dreamed to play piano, but I think that ship has sailed. But no, I'm a listener, not a player.
And are you listening while you're working at the easel?
Definitely, yeah. And it's funny. I gave you a list of songs that I love, and I was telling my husband that I have to, I've learned the hard way that I have to be conscious of what I'm listening to, because I tend to start painting at the pace of the song. And so
Oh, interesting.
yeah, and so like if it gets too like fast, I'm like, okay, let's take a break. Because I'm having a great time and it's fun, and then I'm like, what am I doing here?
I love that. Well, I'm looking at your playlist now, which includes Pixies and Arcade Fire and Radiohead, as you mentioned. So if we could play a track during this podcast, Lisa, which would be the first one? Who would you like to listen to first?
Gosh, it depends on the day. Today, I guess I could put how I listed. I think I put Pixies first. They're one of my go-tos.
Good. Okay. Well, you know why we ask our guests for their playlists is because we use your music under the Instagram posts.
I love that. Yeah.
So you will be hearing all this back. So depending on your mood, as you say. Now, I don't know Pixies. So you have to tell me, what kind of tempo are we talking about here?
Well, they sometimes get me in trouble because it's pretty wide swing of tempo. But some of their songs can get pretty kind of, I don't know if you want to say modern punk, but like contemporary punk, like pretty quick. Yeah. So I have to watch myself.
And if you're driving the car and the family are in it, do you get to choose if you're driving what music plays?
I don't know. That's a good question. I usually get criticized by the family if I pick. So I'm very like self-conscious of picking something everyone will like, I think.
Okay.
Because I have a bunch of music snobs in my family. So.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Were your parents musical then? Is that the influence?
No, not at all.
You were born and raised in Eugene, Oregon, so you haven't moved very far to Portland now by way of going to school in Arizona. And your parents, I'm interested because there seems to be some art influence there. Your dad, in his spare time, was a painter and sculptor. Tell us about that. Yeah,
so he had a day job, but my whole life, he was always making something, whether it was painting. He did a lot of wood sculpture. And yeah, he was always, our whole house had paintings and sculptures and all sorts of things around. So yeah. And then I did a sculpture with him at one point. He was good about including me and my brother in that. Yeah. And so to me, painting was always kind of painting. Though I was interested in photography growing up and then ended up studying that in college, painting always, because what I saw in my head was where I wanted to get to. And it was a slow evolution, but it did happen.
And by day, he was an accountant. His name was Frank, and your mum, Patty, was a teacher. What kind of teacher?
School teacher, yeah.
What kind of subjects did she teach?
Well, she did fourth grade, I think, fourth, fifth grade. So it was kind of an everything class. I think at that age, back then, it was, across the board, all subjects.
All subjects. So if you had that influence from your dad for painting and sculpting, were they encouraging you to paint then, Lisa? Was there some inevitability about you becoming an artist?
Oh yeah, they're the type of parents that would support you no matter what. Without the thought to the reality of how is my kid going to make a living doing that. But yeah, they would definitely have just supported any desire I had for that.
So growing up in Eugene, Oregon, what was that like? Paint us a picture.
It's a smallish town. It's a university town, though. So being a university town, it had a lot of things going on for the size. But of course, you always kind of want to get out of where you grew up. Now I look at it, I'm like, oh, it's the perfect sized town. But yeah, it's a very quaint little town, although it was heavily influenced. A lot of quote unquote hippies in the 60s moved there. So it became quite the stuck in the 70s era when I was growing up. We had Grateful Dead was huge. We had quite a few kind of like throwbacks of that era that still existed as if it was still happening in that town. But then it was like contrasted against a university setting and very, surrounded by farmland and forests. So
it was the city life then. Would you call yourself a city girl?
I wouldn't say it's a city. I mean, it's a good size. I mean, it was when I was growing up, I think it was 100,000. So I had enough to like occupy you, but I would have never counted it as a city growing up.
What about the art community there? Did you have any influence as a child? Did you visit galleries and museums?
We would go to museums quite a bit growing up. And yeah, whenever we traveled, we used to drive across the country to visit family every summer. And they were always really good about taking us to places where we stopped, including museums and things like that. So yeah, like we'd take a bike ride on the weekend. It ended at the art museum on the university campus. So that was kind of was normal for me.
Do you remember some of the early names that you were learning about the artists?
Oh, not really. I don't think I was ever particularly like focused on specific artists growing up. It was more just the general atmosphere, and then of course watching my dad and his parents were immigrants, and he had actually moved back to Germany for a while and lived there. So his influences were very like German abstraction of like the 60s. So that I've always loved abstract painting for that. And yeah, his influences were very strong. So
as you became an adult then and immersed in art, who would be the artists that would appeal to you then, your taste now?
So many. Yeah. Like I think, talking about women artists and contemporary artists or historical?
Historical.
Oh gosh. Well, I love trying to think of names. I'm horrible with names.
Were they mainly German or other Europe?
Oh, like I didn't even make that connection with my dad's work until later when I started to know more artists and more history of art. Then I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, that's a very direct influence of German abstraction. But that didn't really make a connection. But for me, I would say like Fairfield Porter is a big influence. I love his work. And in kind of in the same vein, Lois Dodd, who's still living, but that whole group of work, it really resonates with me, and their depiction of what was around them and their daily life is a big influence in my work.
Do you hear people looking at your work compare you to any artists that you say, oh, yes, okay, this is who I want to be compared to? Or do you rebel against that comparison?
I've never really heard a comparison. I think not recently, like maybe earlier when I was starting. I guess I've always taken comparison as a compliment. But I do have a tendency to push back against, I'd say probably more of a rebellious in that regard, in that like, I may push back against something like that and go the other direction. I used to do a lot of abstraction, and at some point I just kind of chose figurative over abstraction and went that direction.
Mm-hmm. What do you like about what do you like to hear people say about your work now?
I think one of the biggest compliments would just be that it makes them feel something, and that they find something in it that they connect with. I mean, I think that's a pretty big compliment, that the work could reach out and make a connection with somebody.
Let's rewind, Lisa, if we may, to when you started painting with any real intention and what your feelings were about it. How did it make you feel?
In some ways, I started painting in college. I was in the photography program, but I would use the photographs, a positive print photograph, paint on it, and then use that as the negative print to print a new print. And so that's kind of where the blending of the two mediums started. I think painting has always appealed to me in that there's a starting point and you don't know where it's going to go. Like the process dictates a lot of the end point for me. And so you can have that in photography using different techniques, I suppose. But for me, photography was more straightforward, and painting was like not a harder path, but a less straight, distinct path. And that always interested me.
Do you still enjoy photography?
I mean, just with my iPhone, like everybody, I don't pick up like a camera proper very often anymore. But I do use my phone a lot.
And you do paint almost daily, do you? Is it just during the week? Do you give yourself personal time at the weekend? What does that look like? I
think because I work my studios in my home, I do tend to not necessarily paint every day, but I do tend to do something every day, whether it's, just administrative or going out to the studio and doing something or actually painting. It does tend to be up every day. But I do take days off where it doesn't happen. But I try to be pretty good about a routine, because I think it's easy to not feel like doing it. You know what I mean? But I get out there, and I've gotten better at telling when it's going to be a good day and when you just push through, and when it's time to say, okay, I'm going to take a break for the day and do another thing. But it's usually most days. I try and be pretty routine about it.
So when you go in the studio, do you close the door and put do not disturb on it and then turn on the music to set the mood, or have the where you are and where you're feeling that day determine what the music is going to be? I'm wondering which way round that comes, and what your mindset is when you think, I am going to work now.
Yeah, the hardest part is that at my studio is in our backyard, so everyone knows really not to bother me, so I don't have to put a sign. But yeah, I don't think too much about what music. It's just mostly, I open my Spotify and I just kind of pick what sounds good that day and start going. Yeah, and once I'm out there, it's not that hard to get into, and I always kind of amazed at sometimes I'll sell it to myself if I'm not feeling it. I'll just go out there and just, do this for just a little bit, just to do something productive. And I get out there and you just kind of get sucked into the work and hours go by, which is a good thing. That's always a good day when you're out there for much longer than intended.
And who gets to see the work first? Do you call John and get his first review, or how do you feel about that first showing and who gets to see it?
Oh man. I guess I'm not precious about first showing. I mean, a lot of times I'll just throw it on Instagram, to be honest, if I'm happy with it. And yeah, I'm not too secretive about what I'm up to, for sure. I probably should be better about that. But
did the family critique it? Did they get to see?
I mean, if they want, it's funny because I'm in a family of scientists and I'm like the only, the only artist. So there's not a lot of interest, to be honest. I do remember once when my kids were little, I had a painting in the house, and one of my daughter's friends was like, "That's really weird." And I was like, took that as a huge compliment that a kid was like, "That's really weird." Yeah, but no, I live with my family is like scientist brained, so
okay, different side of the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't have that side of the brain, so.
Now, what about commissions? How much do they rule your life, Lisa?
When I started, I did a lot. I pretty much started with commissions and portraits. And now I rarely do commissions. Yeah, because they're a totally different animal. Commissions, people's expectations or what they have in their head it can be challenging to get out. And I'm luckily enough I can stay busy now just doing the work I want to do. And so I'll do a couple a year, but that's pretty much it.
Now, you graduated from the University of Arizona with a Bachelor in Fine Arts. What year was that, Lisa?
97.
97. And what was on your mind at that time? Did you have a purpose for your career, or were you playing it by ear? What did life look like in college and then when you graduated?
Well, I studied photography, and somehow got it in my head that I was going to, because I was like, as I got closer to graduation, I'm like, ooh, what am I going to actually do? Our professors were very forward and saying only 2% of you will make a living doing this. So, and you hear that enough and you're like, ooh. For some reason, I thought I was going to get into still photography for movies. Because I was interning for a stock photo agency in college, and the owner knew somebody who did that. And so that sounded interesting because I always had an interest in film. So at first I thought I might do that, but that never came to be.
So what did you do once you graduated?
Oh, I got like your typical horrible art graduate day job in a film studio where they, process like thousands of photos a day. And I was you sit in a dark room with this machine and you roll through thousands of photos a day, printing them. Yeah, that's a good motivator to figure out what you want to do in life, for sure.
And after that?
For a while, I did greeting cards, believe it or not. But with my photography, I printed them. I had printers and actually I did pretty well. I was in a lot of the biggest retailers on the West Coast. And then I was like, is this really what I want to do? It was, it was a better day job than sitting in a dark room printing senior photos all day. But during that time, I started painting again. And then that slowly evolved.
And what mediums were you using then?
For painting?
Yes.
Yeah, I started in acrylic. I've never been an oil painter. I like paint to dry. For my process, paint drying is preferred over endlessly open oil. And it also was just easier in my lifestyle. I had young kids. It's just you can do that around kids without worrying about the toxicity of cleaning brushes, and it's water-based. So it was just the ease of the medium probably as much as anything too.
Mm-hmm. And then were you, whilst you started painting, whilst you were married and raising a family then? So how long have you been a professional?
It's so weird how time goes and you don't clock how long it's been. I'd say I'd have to look at my CV to be honest, but probably I'd say 15, 20 years since I would consider myself a professional painter.
Do you feel you right now then, Lisa, you're where you want to be as an artist?
I always feel like I'm trying to get somewhere. I don't know where that end place is, but no, I think if I felt like I was in a good spot, then I would be stagnant. I'm always trying to do something. Looking at the next thing, my favorite, probably a lot of painters, but my favorite thing is starting a new painting. And I feel like that's kind of indicative of how I feel about where I'm at. I always want to start something new, constantly looking at the next.
So is that the order of things then on the easel? You finish one before you start another, or are there?
Oh, for sure.
Canvases? Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
So you don't leave unfinished canvases on the floor?
Oh, yeah. No, I can't finish a painting like straight out, start to finish without starting something else. No. Yeah. It's one of those things that you realize like, oh, I might have a little bit of ADD. And I think it's funny when and I've talked to other artists and they all just kind of nod their head. With deadlines are good for me and my process because I think I would just keep starting new paintings. And, and a lot of times the hardest part for a work will be kind of not the end, but a little past the middle. And so you don't have a reason to force yourself past that hard part sometimes. You can linger in that like, do I like it? And some of the more successful paintings is when you push yourself past that point. So I like deadlines.
And I'll be right back with more from Lisa Golightly right after this short commercial break, so don't go away. And I'm back with my guest this week, the figurative painter Lisa Golightly. When you look at how you've evolved as an adult and how you've become the artist you've become, does it relate in any way to the child you were?
I'm probably a lot the same person I was as a kid, to be honest. I haven't really thought about who I was as a child, to be honest, but oh man.
I mean, what were you doing as a child, that was, floating your boat back then?
I used to love to strangely sketch. I was like, I would just go outside with a sketchbook and sketch. And now I hate drawing. I hate drawing. I like painting, but I hate drawing. So it's kind of funny. But I remember my dad trying to teach me like, this is how you draw a horse. Or, I'd ask him, how do you draw this? And I have very distinct memories of doing that. I don't think he particularly liked to draw either, which is ironic. And my mom used to always ask him to paint portraits of us. And he wouldn't do it because it was just not in his wheelhouse. So yeah, I like to draw, and I would like making things for people like out of paper or, drawing, constructing things. So yeah, probably not much has changed.
So were you a studious child? Were you a good student and studious? Were you, what sort of personality? I'm always curious because listen to how artists have become the person they are in adult life, and sometimes it reflects what they were as children, and that also art may have helped, find their pathway in life in terms of the personality. It's a voyage of discovery, isn't it, in a way? And I'm just wondering, if the child has become the adult.
Yeah, I would say in my younger years, especially like say pre-teen years, I was definitely considered studious and I loved, I got good grades. I never stopped trying but I, definitely by the end of college, I kind of was like not disillusioned, but the grade wasn't my like end goal, especially in the majority of college classes, to be real. Like the only classes that I really cared about were my photography classes. So I passed everything, but my photography classes were, that's where I wanted the validation and the approval, I'd say, of professors. And I was lucky in that I had, really wonderful professors that encouraged me to continue working outside of after college, even though it looked different than what I was studying at the time. They were my photography professors were very encouraging. With the degree, you have to take other art classes. And ironically, the painting professor at that school was notoriously mean. And that didn't bother me at the time because it wasn't my focus. But I would remember going into that class and girls would be leaving in tears, and he had a tendency to throw paintings on the floor that he didn't like. And it's funny, I thought it was like mildly entertaining, and I never took it to heart. And I think that's a good lesson moving forward as an artist too, is just that, that's what I saw in college, was like people's work being thrown on the floor and like people crying. And I was just like, whoa. So I've never been too bothered by opinion, I guess. So I've always looked at that as a good learning. I mean, it was probably traumatic for a lot of people, but it kind of rolled off my back. So it was a good learning opportunity to not let outside influence matter that much that I would be in tears about it.
So has that shaped how you react to people now? And, do you have broad shoulders, tough shell?
I think so. I mean, I'm kind of grateful for that experience, to be honest. I don't think you would be allowed to to teach the way he did. Now, honestly, I just don't think that would be in university vocabulary anymore, unfortunately, in a way. And, I mean, as an adult, I look back and like, oh, he had some things going on. It wasn't as much about what he was like, the kids' art he was looking at, I don't think. But when you're that kid, and those people, we were kids, really. I could see how, everyone's different, and that could probably have been really traumatic for people, and clearly was. I think luckily, because that wasn't the end all be all for me at the time, painting. So I was able to be like, oh, whatever, but my photography professors were really encouraging. It might have been a different story if they were ripping my photos up and throwing them on the ground.
Well, your parents, I'm sure, were not at all surprised that you've become the artist you've become. But what do you think your friends in college, college mates, and the people that you grow up with, your contemporaries, what would they say?
Yeah, I don't think anything I was doing growing up or in college even would have said, oh, this is going to be a professional artist. As I remember, there was one person in the photography program that you could tell the professor's like, oh, she's gonna make a go of this. And I never had that pressure on myself, because I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do after university. And I often wonder, like, if I could remember names, go back and Google and see who is actually an artist now. But I don't think anyone would have even known that was something that would have been on my horizon as like a teenager growing up, being an artist. It wasn't like, in the art classes in high school. I don't think I even took art in high school. But I was always making stuff at home. It's just not something I would wanted to do at school. So I was probably surprised yeah.
You mentioned an interest in film at that time. Do you still have an interest?
I mean, yeah, a bit. And I love, it was a huge influence. I actually went to university thinking I would be a film major. And then that shifted into still photography. But yeah, like I mentioned, part of that came back into play when I was looking at after college, if I didn't even know still photographers existed within films. You know, all the pictures you see of a film are taken by a still photographer on set. Thank God now, because I remember talking to a still photographer in the industry, and he didn't really sell it, let me put it that way. He talked about, you know, long hours, tedious, and how boring it is. And that might be why I didn't go into it. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think, a clear influence of photography in my work, but part of that is also film. And I also do work from film stills sometimes of old home movies. So that definitely still is in the mix.
Do you ever have a moment when you look back on how your childhood, your education shaped you as a young adult and say, I wish I had? How would you finish that sentence?
Ooh. You know, I don't think I would do anything differently. I'm not someone who looks back and wants to change things that happened necessarily. Because I think everything leads to what you're doing now. If I wasn't happy with what I was doing now, I might have a different answer, but I don't really wish I did anything differently or in a different pace or a different time or a different order, because it all kind of built on itself.
If you weren't an artist, do you know what you would do? What other things do you enjoy?
Maybe interior design, which is a bit of a creative field, but yeah, I've always, my parents were big into interior design. Growing up, I grew up being drugged to every antique store in this country. They were big antique collectors, and we had a lot of like house magazines around. So I didn't grow up looking at art magazines, but I would look at house magazines. And my favorite part, and still is, of looking at house design and interior decorating is what art people choose and place and where they put it. And that's always what I was looking at in design.
So in your home, then, do you decorate it with your art mostly, or do you like other influences? Are you a collector?
Oh, no. None of my art. I couldn't live with my art on the walls, because I would be looking at little things that, no, I don't want to look at it all day. But yeah, I tried to start collecting more work of other artists. So definitely live with other people's work, not my own.
And what does validation look like for you as an artist? Where's the ultimate satisfaction and validation as an artist?
I mean, ultimately, I think you have to be happy with your own work, or not even happy. That's probably not the right word, but satisfied and like fulfilled by the process as much as anything for me. Obviously, when people respond to it in a gallery or, someone buys it, that feels great, because if someone wants to live with something you made, it feels incredible. It's a huge compliment. But ultimately, I think just the day-to-day process of making is what really kind of is the fulfilling part for me.
So when you go to bed and switch off the light, what do you like to feel before you go to sleep in terms of your work and the satisfaction of your work? Do you like to feel like a rock star, that you've done one piece that surprised you, or do you go to bed with frustration that a piece is not turning out the way it has?
It depends on what day, probably. Yeah.
All of
there's a little bit of exactly. It depends on what day of the week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I take a lot of photos in the studio, and so in the evenings, a lot of times I'll be sitting there looking at photos that I took from that day's work, and that is usually, I mean, it's fun, amazing. I don't know why our brain does this, but for some reason, looking at the photo of the work, I see more than staring at it in person sometimes. Just like that separation of not being directly in front of it allows me to see things that I like and don't like about it as much as in person. So that's kind of my evening. But I guess depending on what I'm looking at on my phone before I go to bed, if I like that day's work or not.
So you really are combining your photography and the art then. And do you photograph the process of a piece?
I'll do it. Yeah. And that's usually what I'm looking at night, because small sketches I can do within a day, but like a big piece on a panel is not something I usually do in one sitting. So I'm always looking at where it's at the end of the day. Or I'll go switch back, in different points in its existence and see what I liked from what point. And sometimes the trajectory is up and sometimes it's down. And so then it's about, do you go back and try and go back to what you liked, or do you move forward and just see where it takes you? But it's definitely a huge part of my process. It's the starting point, and I guess in a lot of ways the ending point, because when you're done with a painting, you photograph it. And so they're very integrated processes for me.
What would you say art has taught you as a person? What do you say? What would you think the influence on you has become? I know we all feel something different as people from how art influences us. Maybe other people's art, or having been an artist, combining all of those things, it makes us sometimes feel that we've discovered a part of ourselves, of course, in our work. But what would you say were the headlines of that? I
mean, on a daily life basis, I would say for me, it's patience. I'm not a patient person. Anyone that knows me, I'm a very impatient person. And painting can often just takes a lot of patience. Not every painting I paint, I'm happy with or ever sees the light of day. So it's continuing on, like perseverance for like not letting one thing or one bad day or one bad painting tumble the whole process, and just moving on. And I think I'm getting better at that as I get older. When I look at other people's work, it's a bit of a relief because I'm not as critical of other people's work in a lot of ways. It's because when I look at my own work, I see all the things I would change possibly, and other people's work, the same things. If it was my painting, I would change, I accept and love. So that's probably a good life lesson, to accept your own flaws. So I love looking at other people's work, and that's why I can't live with my own work, is because I just could not look at it all day. I would see all the things I should have done differently, potentially.
It's knowing when to stop when you're painting something, isn't it? That's the key. To stand back and say, okay, that's done, right? I'm not going to touch it again.
Yeah.
Are you a fiddler?
I am. And sometimes I'll send a gallery a photo, and by the time they actually get it, I've changed little things here and there. Yeah.
When you look back at your life, if you do, Lisa, and reflect on the trajectory, what would you say the milestones have been for you, and why?
It's probably, a path of personal and professional cross a lot, but, I moved away for university, and that was a big thing for me. I think a good thing. I had to create my own world in a new place. I didn't know anybody. That was a big point. And then starting a family, of course. But then when I started painting, I took an unconventional route to painting because I didn't do it right out of university. And when I finally started showing my work, that was quite a long path to showing with galleries. And so I'd say getting my first galleries was a big point. of validation for what I was doing.
You've mentioned, obviously, where music plays a role in your life. What about books? Are you a reader?
Yeah, but I would say not as much as music. I have a serious art book problem.
A library, Lisa, a library.
Yeah. My family would definitely call it a problem. Addiction. Yeah, I love art books.
So do you
it's nice to have
with a book at the
and references when you're stuck, and it's just nice, to have all this work that you own these books because you love the artist's work. And so when you're stuck or you're feeling unmotivated, or it's wonderful to be able to open a book and be like, oh yeah, that's right. That's, and that motivates me, to be honest. Is like looking at work that I love motivates me more than anything else. It makes me want to make work that I love, that I feel proud of. And nothing, I don't know if that's a competitive thing, but like I'll see art that I love and I'm like, oh, that's right. I want to go make some art that really, it makes me feel like that.
And nowadays, of course, you've got your work shown in various places. I'm curious where we could see it now, Lisa.
Yeah, so I show with several galleries. Billis Williams in Los Angeles. And then I also show with Maya Frodman in formerly Taylor Piggott in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I also show with Julie Nestor in Park City.
And how much of the time are you in the studio? I mean, do you do any plein air painting? Do you like to be outside with a different light?
No, I'm pretty much a studio painter.
Yeah. Does the outside environment, though, influence you in the different lights, though? I wonder what your studio looks like in terms of the available light that you have, natural light.
Probably too much natural light, to be honest. It's a south facing, and so I have lots of shades I put down. And if it's too sunny, I have a super, super high sensitivity to light. So it's too sunny. Ironically, I can have a hard time painting. And so I live in the right place because it's cloudy or rainy most of the year here. But yeah, it's funny. I've had it my whole life, but I didn't really put it together until the last handful of years that my sensitivity, I'll get like visual migraines, which makes it almost impossible to see what you're doing. I will, like at certain concerts, I'll pass out almost from the lighting. So that's fun.
Yeah, so these are aura migraines then when you visually...
it's a ocular migraine. So I see like if it's really bright and I'm in the sun too much, or I don't know 100% what triggers it, I'll see like flashing zigzaggy lights. It's a really bizarro thing, and I've gotten better at telling when they're coming on and changing where I'm at so that hopefully I can stop them in their tracks. But it's kind of one of the, it's not painful, which is great, but it does take like an hour to go away. So that's not fun.
That would really interrupt a studio session then.
Exactly. Yeah. So I tend to be more of a morning worker in the summer before the sun is kind of blaring in. Yeah, it's a weird problem. Too much. I don't never turn on overhead lights, no matter how dark it is. I just very sensitivity to light, like light bulbs and different lighting. So yeah, I'd rather work in a dark space than a overlit space, strangely enough.
We haven't talked about travel, Lisa. Are you a keen traveler? Do you like to go on big vacations and get inspired by different environments?
I do. It's such a weird time though, because I haven't really traveled much in the last, gosh, I think it's been about 5 years since we've really done a lot of traveling. I took my I went to Jackson, which was great last year for a solo show. But it was a super quick trip. I took my kids to a concert in Vegas a few months ago, which was the first trip I've taken with them in years. And that was really fun and got me really wanting to travel again. We just haven't, my husband travels a lot for work and I will travel for shows, but that's about it. We haven't done a family trip or even just me and my husband in so long. But I do love to travel. I grew up, like I mentioned, we would drive across, we had a Vanagon, a VW Vanagon growing up. We'd drive that across the country. So I've been to most states west of Michigan, just by driving. So I do love a good road trip, but I love traveling overseas as well. So hopefully more of that will be in the future.
Well, I'm sure concerts are an important family event for you too. Who are the artists that you're still hoping to see?
I've seen like most of my bucket list art. I haven't seen Arcade Fire live.
Okay, Arcade Fire is on the bucket list. Anything else on the bucket list?
I'd say so. Oh, bucket list. I'm not a big bucket list person.
Okay,
because
let's relate it to travel. What's on the travel bucket list?
I would love to go back to Italy. We went there years ago with our kids, and we always, when we were even there, we were like, oh, we have to come back someday. So I'd love to do that. My husband works for a Dutch company, so that's always he goes there a lot. So I have a feeling I'll be going back there soon. Which, whenever I can go over there, it's fun to go to galleries and museums over there. So that's always a good bonus.
And what does 2024 look like for you now? We're well into it. Do you have any workshops, any showings?
I have a show coming up in October in Los Angeles at Billis Williams. So I've just started working on work for that.
And when is that?
In October.
Okay. Well, Lisa, it's been great to get to know you a little bit anyway. And I appreciate you sharing your life story on the podcast. And again, thank you very much for being my guest this week.
Thanks so much for having me.
And you'll find a link to Lisa's website and to her social media right there in the show notes on your podcast app. And you can also find the complete transcript of the show in your podcast app too. So it's all there in one place. Plus links, of course, to our social media where you can post your comments and questions, suggestions. You can also reach us via email at hollowellstudios@gmail.com. I always love to hear from you, so do please drop us a line anytime and tell us what you think of the show, and also share it with anyone who you think might be interested. My thanks again to my guest this week, Lisa Golightly, and to you for listening. I'll be back next week with another guest from the world of visual arts, so I do hope you'll join me then.